Hello everyone and welcome back. It's I, Michelle, aka Chat-Mort, and thank you for returning once again to my humble little channel. Someday I'm gonna get a real diffuser. So the washcloth hanging off of my ring light doesn't get in the shot like constantly. Someday I'm actually gonna do that. I promise. I recently got an email that most of you probably did not receive, and that is purely because political affiliations are pretty varied within this sphere of interest, but I tend to be pretty far right leaning in that spectrum itself. You may know, and if you don't, I will tell you now, that I believe in objective morality. I don't believe that culture informs morality. I don't believe that there is any difference in what is objectively right and wrong around the world. Because I believe that a lot of the things that are being embraced by Western culture are wrong, I tend to be lumped in with people who actually want to legislate or mandate that people do not partake in those things. One of my issues, for example, with socialism is that it attempts to legislate charity or mandate morality, in which case it's not morality or charity at all. There's nothing Christ-like or kind or loving or decent about something that you are doing, that you are forced to do. A lot of sexual behaviors and practices that have been more or less embraced recently by our culture are things that I perceive to be immoral. I also want to give the caveat that I do not necessarily abstain from everything that I find to be immoral. People seem to assume that that is the case and seem to want to point out that you're a hypocrite if you flirt with anybody or you watch anything erotic or saucy or anything like that, if you profess to find those things to be immoral. To those people, I would like to point out that human beings are not perfect, clearly, and it's very important, if you want to be sane whatsoever and have any grasp on reality, that you acknowledge that you are in some ways hypocritical, that you are not going to be able to adhere to the standards that you wish you could or that you aspire to. I do not presume to be perfect, and I do not want anybody else to think that I think I am perfect. So when I point these things out, I want to make it very clear that I am aware that some of these things are things that I struggle with as well, or that I do not handle in as mature a way as I would like to, or with as much self-control as I would like to. Now that I've gotten all of the rambling disclaimers out of the way, I want to go into the email I got. It was from someone named Don Hawkins, and Don Hawkins works for the National Center on Sexual Exploitation, or NCOSE. You may see it abbreviated all over the place. Victory in video games. Dear Michelle, great news. Steam, one of the largest distributors of online games, has contacted several video game developers asking them to remove sexually graphic content in their games on Steam or face delisting. This sudden change comes after a 2-year campaign by the National Center on Sexual Exploitation, which included naming the company to the Dirty Dozen list, and most recently a heightened week-long grassroots campaign which began on May 10th, where individuals from around the country requested Steam to remove sexually exploitive content. Steam hosts approximately 35 million users who are children and teenagers, yet it also has hosted video games that promote themes of sexual violence, exhibitionism, and rape, often depicting childlike characters in sexual scenes. It's about time that the video game community is responding to this #MeToo moment and is distancing itself from gamified sexual violence. We thank Steam for its decision and encourage other gaming sites and stores to follow their lead. And we thank you for helping make it happen by signing petitions, sending emails, donating, and more. Sincerely, Don Hawkins, Senior VP and Executive Director, NCOSE. Clearly, wanting to stop or prevent as much sexual exploitation as possible is a good thing. It's something that virtually everyone can embrace and agree upon. Obviously, I don't want anybody to be sexually exploited. I don't want anyone to be manipulated into any kind of sexual activity, pressured into it. I don't want anybody's sexual activity to be publicized in any way without their consent. I don't want people to be forced into an unhealthy relationship with sex due to it constantly being shoved down their throats by the media as it currently is. And obviously, if there's anything I could do to stop sex trafficking, I would, which is one of the reasons why I really, really support Operation Our Rescue and think that it's one of the charities that is the most pressing for people to try to donate to and help in any way possible. This is why I signed up for the newsletter from NCOSE, because I thought it was a phenomenal organization, and although I can't really financially support any charities at this point in my life, I'd like to stay informed on what's going on and their efforts and any victories they may have. You will see in the email that they consider themselves to have scored a victory over graphic sexual content by pressuring Steam, which is, as they put it, the Walmart of video games, into removing some graphic sexual content or games containing graphic sexual content from their platform and their store. The organization characterizes their efforts as a 2-year-long aggressive campaign to try to get any sort of graphic sexual content removed from Steam. When I got this email, I was livid. I am all for traditional, you might call them, values. I am all for reserving sex for people that you love, people that you at least really trust and respect. I think that sex ideally is between people who are committed, between people who have established that they can trust one another and who genuinely care about one another's well-being physically and mentally. I also think that graphic sexual content is immoral. I think that being exposed to it too much is bad for you. I think being desensitized to the thrill and the endorphin rush of sex is awful for people. I think it is a contributing factor to a lot of broken relationships and to a lot of unhealthy relationships that people end up having with sex and with the opposite sex and just with any kind of sexual content they may be exposed to in general. However, I'm not an authoritarian. I believe certain things, which is why I struggle to and attempt to implement them in my own life, and why I want to share with other people why I find these things to be immoral, or at least immoral in the excess that our society has embraced and promoted. I'm not the kind of person who thinks that forcing people to avoid any kind of sexually explicit content is going to magically make them wonderful, chaste, righteous people who only have sex to procreate within the marriage that they will stay in for the entirety of their lives. There is nothing Christ-like, there is nothing charitable, there is nothing good or kind or courageous about forcing people to adhere to your morals. There's nothing courageous about that whatsoever, and this should not come as a shock to anyone. I would hope that an organization that wants to stop exploitation of women and pretty much anybody would understand that forcing people to do something, forcing your standards and your priorities on other people is wrong, right? That would seem very consistent with their platform. Evidently not. As I have come to discover much later than I would have, unfortunately, if I had probably done my research, NCOSE is not particularly interested in helping people. If they were, they would be trying to spread their message in a good way. They would be trying to do it in an informative way as opposed to an intimidating way, as opposed to using authoritative measures, intimidation tactics, to try to prevent people from having access to the kind of content that they don't want people to have access to. While I do think that there may be some relevance to the argument that all of these things contribute to one another and have an integral relationship with one another, that being pornography, sex trafficking, adultery, anything along these lines, it still boggles my mind that this company is doing nothing but trying to pressure these companies into removing products from their platforms, as opposed to actually maybe, I don't know, trying to spread awareness about the rampant sexual abuse of children and women in this country, the rampant sex trafficking industry that is very much alive and well in Mexico, and it's bleeding into America. You would think that these would be the priority. However, that does not seem to be the case, since they're pouring their efforts into aggressive campaigns against retailers. The National Center on Sexual Exploitation has jumped to the conclusion that there's an intrinsic relationship between explicit video games, graphically violent video games, and violence and sexual abuse in the real world, which there may be anecdotal evidence for, but that has not been empirically proven. Not conclusively at all. Something that I must have been incredibly naive to think that a company such as this would understand is that when you force something on people, it's not going to make them any healthier. It's not going to make them any happier. Is that really that complicated to understand? If this company really cared about stopping abuse, about changing the culture around women and sex and rape, and the way that we look at all of these things societally, as opposed to curtailing someone else's freedom of speech in the form of a game that they spent hours working on, that many people who have never sexually assaulted someone or acted violently towards someone have enjoyed and consumed, perhaps they might discuss how important it is for families to instill a healthy relationship with sex in their own children. Perhaps the way to go about this would be to inform parents that children are going to be exposed to sexual content, and that it is therefore the parents' job to try to equip their children with the tools necessary to have a healthy relationship with this content. This organization professes to want traditional family values to flourish. This company supposedly condemns the extremely progressive, extremely sex-positive culture that is being pushed down children's throats. Yet instead of advocating for arming families and children with the tools to have a healthy relationship with these things, they're trying to get the end result, they're trying to get the product removed altogether. You would think that a company that cares about protecting children from being exposed to graphic sexual content would reach out to parents and explain to them the importance of knowing what kind of platforms your child is accessing, would encourage parents to monitor their children carefully when those children are on the internet. Steam is not a platform that you can use without your parents' permission. You are supposed to be of a certain age to use Steam. You have to be old enough to have some form of payment to get any games on Steam. And any games that are deemed by Steam to have any sort of graphic, sexual, or violent content are behind a wall where you have to verify your age before entering. Unless parents are neglecting their children, unless parents are choosing to allow their children to be exposed to the dangers of the internet and all of the possibilities therein, children are not going to be accessing these games. Yes, I do believe in objective morality, but I do not believe that intimidation and censorship is going to magically get everyone to see the light and become wonderful Christian conservatives who reject all objectifying sex and any kind of content therein. What's even more spectacular to me is how ludicrous some of these accusations are. NCOSE equates many games that have nothing to do with non-consensual sex with sexual violence and with contributing to the Me Too movement of women being sexually harassed and speaking out about it. NCOSE makes no attempts to distinguish between games that are about graphic sexual content that is very much consensual, any kind of content that is not consensual, and any kind of content that advocates for any sort of voyeuristic or incestuous or any otherwise perverse activities. This is blatantly disingenuous, and it frankly does nothing but harm the movement to try to educate people on how to have a more healthy relationship with sex. I'm frankly appalled at myself for having let this go so long and for not being more diligent about researching the kind of companies that I purported to advocate for. No, I did not donate any money to this company or any of my time, but I was signed up to their newsletter, and I assumed that they were doing good things. I assumed that this company actually cared about educating people, about helping families reclaim their children and the way their children interact with the world around us, this very secular, very hedonistic society. That was clearly very naive of me. This organization has the audacity to conflate games that are set behind several different walls to keep children, to keep anyone under legal age from accessing them, with sexual assault and sex trafficking and violence and sexual harassment toward women in the real world. This kind of dishonesty is atrocious to me, particularly since these people are operating under the guise of actually caring about helping people, about stopping sexual exploitation, while presenting themselves as a very conservative, righteous, moral organization. This company is pressuring platforms into removing content that falls completely within the First Amendment, as opposed to expecting families to actually monitor their children and protect their children from this content. Under the guise of caring about women and stopping exploitation of people, this company is pushing progressive, censorship, totalitarian values. Conflating games that anyone under the age of 18 is not permitted to buy or even view the Steam page for with sexual assault and sexual harassment is disgusting and unbelievably disingenuous. Stopping platforms from offering the products that they choose to offer, and stopping game devs who have worked tirelessly on games from being able to earn money on their products is in no way, shape, or form stopping sexual exploitation. I could not be more disgusted and disappointed in myself for having fallen for this and for having thought NCOSE actually cared about stopping sexual abuse, sexual harassment, and sexual exploitation. I am disgusted that this company is pushing a progressive agenda by conflating games that are kept behind a wall, that only people who are over 18 are allowed to even see the Steam pages for, let alone purchase, with sexual abuse and sex trafficking. I cannot believe that I fell for this. I cannot believe that I actually thought that this company was going to try to reach out to people and educate them and try to restore family values and try to equip people with the tools necessary to have a healthy relationship with a very secular, very, very sex-obsessed world. I can't believe that I actually thought this company would try to help people as opposed to just intimidating different retailers into dropping their products, intimidating people into censoring their content, or getting rid of their content altogether, who have done nothing wrong and who have no obligation to conform to your specific set of values. If you really cared about stopping exploitation, if you really cared about women not being harassed and pressured into things they didn't want to do, you would not be pressuring people who have no obligation to conform to your conservative standards into conforming to them. It makes no sense. It's totalitarian, it's disingenuous, it's completely counterintuitive to what you profess to believe. And it's disgusting that you would conflate perfectly consensual sex acts in a game with sex abuse and sex trafficking. As a conservative who thinks that our society is far too blasé about sex, and as a conservative who thinks that sex is not healthy in most relationships that are not committed, that are not trusting, that are not built on at least respect, I think that forcing this on people is disgusting, and I think that it's counterintuitive to take away this content that has every right to exist, particularly when Steam has already gone through several measures to ensure that nobody under legal age is going to access or view these things. You're not doing any good, you're not helping anyone, you're not stopping sexual exploitation by intimidating these platforms into taking down material that they have every right to have up. What you are doing is you are causing the world to perceive anybody who believes in more traditional family values as totalitarian, progressive feminists. You are making us all look terrible. I feel like this was kind of incoherent. It was filmed at 3 a.m. and I'm completely exhausted. In summation, I denounce this organization fully. I am disgusted and ashamed at myself for not having focused a little bit more on figuring out what their tactics were. I am disgusted that this company is advocating for intimidation and censorship as opposed to actually trying to instill the values that they profess to care about in the people who most need to be equipped with them. There is nothing conservative, there is nothing Christ-like, there is nothing traditional or wholesome or moral or chaste about intimidating people, about censoring content that has every right to exist. The companies making this content are not the ones at fault when children are exposed to this material. Why would you blame the publishers of a game who clearly only target the game at people who are of legal age, when the only way for children to even access the page to buy this game is for parents to be completely neglectful and for parents to refuse to supervise their children online? As always, thank you guys so much for watching. I love you dearly, and I will see you again very soon. Bye.